Hello, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. So today, actually, let me just get rid of this really quick, since we have in fact started. So today we're going to be reading an article here, and I may take some suggestions if there's any other articles folks want to read just on some tech stuff. And then I'm going to be discussing some enterprise dev practices. So just kind of what it's like to be a developer at a big tech company, some of the things that we do, some of the things that we don't do, and maybe give you guys an idea of what it's like to kind of be a developer there. But we are going to start with this article here, which is on why you should develop a correction of error provided by the AWS blog. I'm just going to copy this and paste this in the chat in case anyone wants to follow along. If you can't hear me, please let me know. Is my audio okay? I think it is. My green light is going up and down, so I think that's fine. If not, please let me know. Okay, so let's just get right into it. So this is an article from February 2022. But it's a very interesting read, and I think this is something that's pretty unique to Amazon and AWS, and other companies probably have their own terminology for these kind of. Audio is low. How do I fix that? Does this work? What does this button do? Is that better? Any better? Hello? Yes? No? Okay, I'm going to assume it's fine. Anyways, other companies probably have their same processes for this, like postmortems, whatever they call it. But the difference is that Amazon's process isn't necessarily just an incident report of what happened, but it is more of how do we identify, obviously what happened, what led up to it, and then how do we prevent these types of errors systemically in all the other systems that kind of have maybe similar setups going forward. So that's what this article is about. I kind of skimmed it over really quick, but I want to go over it more in detail. And at some point, I'll probably make a more concise video for this type of thing. Okay, so let's go through. So application reliability is critical. Service interruptions result in a negative customer experience, thereby reducing customer trust and business value. One best practice that we've learned at Amazon is to have a standard mechanism for post-incident analysis. This lets us analyze a system after an incident in order to avoid recurrences in the future. These incidents also help us learn more about how our systems and processes work. Still low. This is as high as I can get. I don't know if there's anything else I can do. You may have to crank up your volume a little bit. I promise I won't blow your eardrums. Where was I? That knowledge often leads to actions that help other incident scenarios, not just the prevention of a specific reoccurrence. This is kind of what I was talking about before, how it isn't just about talking about the specific issue, but talking about how do we prevent this category of issues going forward. I have to say too, I've written my own COEs at Amazon, probably 5, 6, maybe up to 10 COEs in the decade I've been there. It's not necessarily a fun process, but it's definitely not like any kind of punishment or anything like that. I always kind of enjoyed it. It depends on, I guess, your perspective. But when you have a culture of learning and trying to improve, then it's usually something that people don't get mad about. It's more of, we need to do this thing so that we can be better. And that's kind of how you need to think about development in general. The mechanism is called the correction of error, or COE process. Kind of a dirty word, but it's okay. Although post-event analysis is part of the COE process, it is different from a post-mortem because the focus is on corrective actions, not just documenting failures. Yep, that was something we just mentioned. This post will explain why you should start implementing the COE mechanism after an incident and its components to help you get started. Is it the same as a post-mortem is a question. Not necessarily, because there's a section called the 5 whys, which is it takes a problem and it breaks it down, and you start with some issue and you keep on asking why did that thing happen, and then that leads to another answer. And then you say, why did that thing happen? It leads to another answer. And then you keep on going until you finally get to the bottom line root cause. And then that's how you come away with action items. So a postmortem is usually just like what happened, like here's the sequence of events that led up to this event. But a COE is that and more. And so I think that's where the difference of what Amazon puts together and what you see in like what other companies put together with like Azure and Netflix and Uber Engineering, all that kind of things. The really nice thing as well, like if you're an internal Amazon employee, you get access to all the COEs, except if they're marked private. If there's any kind of sensitive data or sensitive information that's part of the COE, or it's like some kind of security related thing, you're not able to look at it. But for the most part, you're able to basically go there and just look at all the COEs. And there's also like a ranking system too. So there's like people like them, like +1 on them. And there's a wiki that has like the top COEs of like, all time, where you can go there and kind of check out all the gruesome ones. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's interesting to read because maybe I'm sick and twisted, but it's almost like, when you're driving and there's a car crash and everyone slows down, you want to kind of see what happened, even though like it could be bad. Someone could have got hurt. It's kind of the same thing where it's like, wow, this system blew up. It caused all this customer impact. What actually happened here? Like, why did this happen? Right. So I've always found that like really good engineers have this natural curiosity. So like people that, I always respected and thought were great as well, like always used to go and just seek out these COEs and subscribe to them so that you can get notified when they actually become public and published within like Amazon's internal system. But that's the really good thing about the culture there, is that you get to read these things, and it's all pretty much out there. Okay, let's keep on going here. So the COE process, or why should you do a COE? The COE process consists of a post-event analysis. It is imperative that the negative impact caused by the event be mitigated before the COE process begins. So this is something to double click on and just really emphasize. This isn't something that you do as part of the event itself. When I say the event, it's like the outage or whatever, whatever is happening. You mitigate that, you tackle it, you get rid, like you solve the problem first. This is something that you do after the fact, and something that you spend a lot more time on as well. Usually it takes people like a week to put together a COE because they get scrutinized really heavily. And there's such things as internal team COEs, which are not like super customer impacting issues, but things that's like, why did we have this system set up the way it was? Like obviously wrong things that could have been prevented. So those are what's called internal team COEs, which you can assign yourself. I've assigned my own team COEs in the past because it's like, hey guys, like we screwed up. We need to tackle this. The good thing about doing that is that when you have COE, they call them COE action items. They take priority basically above a lot of other things. So you can like push back other projects if you need to, because it's like, hey, we found this huge problem in our system. We have to write a COE about it. We have COE action items. We can't take on these extra tasks, so on and so forth. Looks like my camera just turned off. I don't know why it's been doing that. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to restart it. Hold on. Hopefully it doesn't happen too often here. Okay. May have to, is the focus okay? May have to upgrade my drivers or something. This seems to be happening more often lately, especially when I live stream. Let's keep going. So there's some questions here. Marlon asks, I think we've been doing a similar exercise at my company where incidents have a post-mortem, but also actions for the short and long term. Great to hear. Like, honestly, this is something that I think more companies and more teams, especially maybe smaller companies that don't necessarily have the culture set up yet to be focusing on quality and stability of their systems. It's really important to have these built into your development world. And asks, how is it different from just marking, I believe you mean marking as a bug or a tech debt, and then work on it? I mean, you can mark something as a bug, but like those things tend to get deprioritized and lost pretty easily. like you add them to a backlog and then eventually you start working on it, sure, but maybe like other things happen and you forget about it, and you have different product asks that are more important, so those take priority. COE action items are kind of in a category of their own because they're treated very very heavily, I guess. I can't think of the right word, but that's the idea. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Okay, let's keep on going. Feel free to ask more questions, guys, if you want some more clarity on any of this. The COE process consists of post-event analysis. It's imperative that the negative impact... Okay, we already talked about that. This lets you deep dive the sequence of events leading up to the event, find the root cause of the problem, and identify the remediation actions, analyze the impact of the incident to the business and our customers, and identify the track action items that prevent problems and reoccurrences. Perhaps the severity of the blast is different than a regular bug, says Marlon. That's very true as well. Like, you don't write COEs for like a little bug or like a little problem. You write them when like there's big customer impact. What big is relative to your company and your business, but that's kind of a good like gauge for whether or not you should write it. Like, if you normally serve 10,000 customers and like 2 or 3 people were affected by something, or 10 or 100 maybe, like it's probably not a big deal. But if like a whole bunch, like 50% of your customers are, then it's a big deal. Windows updates, great. What a COE is not, and this is important, not enough people realize this. It is not a process for finding whom to blame for the problem. The purpose of a COE is to facilitate maximum visibility into the areas that are most in need of improvement. Creating a culture that rewards people for surfacing problems will foster greater visibility into the areas that need improvement. Human tendencies lead to repeating actions that are reviewed and limiting actions that are penalized. Very, very important to emphasize here. In fact, in the COE processes that we write, we don't have names actually of people. Like, there's never a reference to a specific engineer or a specific person. It's always like the engineer from X team, or the engineer, or the operator. It's always anonymized because, as soon as you start putting names in there, it's like people start kind of getting their pitchforks out and maybe thinking less of the person. And that's not what this is about. It's about fixing problems, right? As opposed to blaming individual actors. And there's a general thought process too, where it's like, if something happens and it impacts a customer or your systems, which impact a customer, it's not necessarily the person's fault. It's a failure of a sequence of things. Like, maybe you didn't have enough testing. Maybe there was a failure in your process where you didn't do proper QA testing, or there wasn't any integration test that caught this case. Or maybe someone like pushed a commit without a code review. Like, there's usually a sequence of things that lead up to these failures, and it's not necessarily like just one little thing. So that's usually what these COEs tend to look at. And right, that's where your action items will come out of. It is not a process for giving punishment to employees after the occurrence of a bad event. Also very important, it's not a penalization mechanism. It's not something where it should factor into like anyone's promotions or what people think of others. And it's definitely not something that is a punishment. The purpose of the COE process is to make sure of continuous improvement during the life cycle of an application. Oftentimes, the person with the most knowledge of an event is the one who has the most at stake through its outcome. To incentivize the most complete understanding of the course of events, we must create a culture that rewards full disclosure of events and lets the person closest to the bad outcome be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So like, these COEs have tons and tons of detail. You'll see when we break down like the different sections of them, how like you're not going to be able to hide much. And depending on the severity of the COE, you'll have a lot of levels of engineers and directors and VPs and like very high up people that will be reading them. Any ambiguity or any what they call like weasel words, where you try to avoid, like, you did something wrong and you try to hide it, you'll get ripped apart. you should not try to hide anything, because people aren't stupid. They're going to identify that something is missing and ask you that question. And it's a lot worse to be asked that question because you didn't have it in the doc than just have it in the doc in the first place. So it really kind of rewards or emphasizes just being completely transparent about the sequence of events that happened, and like, let's talk about how to fix it. Okay, let's keep on going. The result of the COE process should be documented either in a tool such as AWS System Manager, Incident Manager. I didn't even know they had this, but this is interesting. I may check this out. Or a document containing at least the following sections. I guess this is like a service that they built out of this. Sorry, I just want to check this out really quick. What is this thing? We have a tool internally that probably is basically this thing with makeup on it and exposed to... Okay, I may check this out later, but apparently there's a service that can make this a little bit easier for you. Okay, the first section of the COE is the incident summary. And this is kind of like a high level, like what happened basically, and just summarizing everything else that the person is about to read. So let's check this out. Even though this section is the first one, it should be written last. Very true. Except maybe the context section, which is like the first couple sentences, which is just background information. This section provides the context of the entire event, what I just said, includes details of who was impacted, when, where, and how, include details of how long it took to discover the problem, and summarize both how you mitigated it and how you plan to prevent future reoccurrences. Don't try to fit all the details here. Instead, provide basic information about the incident in the summary. The summary should stand alone without requiring the reader to reference other sections. Write the summary as if it were going to travel as an email update to your company's main stakeholder, such as the CEO. If you use the blah, blah, blah templates, then you can add any section not included in the tool template here. Yeah, this is kind of just like at a glance. It's usually like, I want to say 1 to 3 paragraphs. In the ones that I've written, usually it starts with like a context paragraph. It's like blah, blah, blah team is responsible for X, Y, and Z. We own X, A, B, and C services, which do, all these different things, blah, blah, blah. And then the second paragraph is like the start of the description of the event, such as on Saturday, December 1st at 9 a.m., a deployment was deployed onto some infrastructure, and you describe the sequence there. And then after that, you kind of break down like what happened and what went wrong, and then you talk about the impact, and then you talk about how you mitigated it, and then of course the next steps or action items that you're going to take, just in brief. And asks, what is the outcome or deliverables of the COE? Tangible changes in resources, such as Terraform CDK code changes, or just a document on what needs to be done. So you'll see this towards the end of this thing that we're reading right now. There's the document in itself is one of the outputs, right? Because it's a record of what happened. But the main output, in my opinion, are the action items that come out of it. And the action items are derived from like the analysis of the event itself. And you basically rank them in terms of priority. You have high, medium, and low. And then you assign due dates for each of them. So you would say, like, obviously you should tackle the high ones first. And they should have due dates that are like, weeks in the future, not more than a couple weeks if they're high priority. It also depends on like what the action item is. If it requires like a re-architecture, obviously that's something that, may take more time. But the action items are the key output. And the way we have it set up is that like you can modify the dates for when you can push back the dates for when you need to deliver things if you want. But when you do, it triggers like email notifications to your manager and their manager. So it's not just like you can get away with it. It's something that people will scrutinize if you do it too many times. Okay, let's keep on going in terms of impact. Both investigate and document in a quantifiable manner just how big the impact was for the customers and the business. To do that, it's important to gather detailed information about the number of impacted customers, as well as how they were impacted. An outline to describe the impact to the customer looks like the following. how many customers were impacted, description of the impact, the customers of the business, how severe, and some examples might be were customers overcharged, social media statistics, a description of the impact in terms of monetary loss, were there second order impacts? This is often the case when you have systems with many dependencies. How are the customers impacted in their business or day-to-day activities? There's like a lot of different ways that you can communicate impact. And of course, this depends on your system. Like if it's a product that you own that went down, like maybe people couldn't, I don't know, place orders, for example, which is, you have 10,000 customers that were unable to place an order. If it's an infrastructure service that goes down, then it's like, 10,000 customers that rely on us for databases. If you're like AWS, for example, couldn't fulfill their needs. You can't quantify what their impact was because that's something that's private to those users of your infrastructure, but you get the idea. Usually this involves it's kind of a pain in the butt too to get this kind of information because sometimes you have to scrape logs, put together these scripts to figure out, what are all the requests that came in that failed with this particular type of error, and then summarize them over some period of time. And when you're dealing with systems with really high throughput, like some of these things generate gigabytes and gigabytes of log files per hour, and it's just takes so long to pull all this information and aggregate it, depending on the length of the outage as well. So that's something that's worth thinking about. What non-functional requirements were impacted? Security. Yeah, you never really want to write a security COE. You're going to get nailed to the cross for that one. Reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization. Okay, fine. What were the consequences of the incident? Did this incident cause other incidents to occur? Chain reactions are always brutal. You see this more so. Actually, some interesting ones that I've read, and I think they're publicly available too. The AWS ones, by the way, are always the most interesting ones to read, I find. What was it, last year or maybe the year before? Kinesis went down. And Kinesis is for those of you that don't know, Kinesis is like a data ingestion and processing system. It's like people write events to Kinesis and then you can fan out. It's kind of like SNS, but it's a little bit different. Anyways, so many other AWS services are dependent on Kinesis. So when Kinesis goes down, there's first order, second order, third order, fourth order impacts that are affecting all these other things. So it's kind of crazy to learn about how this one seemingly standalone service has all these other impacts, and all these other services are for whatever reason dependent on it. It's one of the reasons that I think AWS needs to really scrutinize their dependency trees or dependency graphs to try and minimize what services are dependent on, if possible, to try and prevent the blast radiuses if any one of them go down. Okay. Did this incident have consequences outside of the operation of the workload? For example, lost opportunity. We did not win a contract, lost some amount of dollars, did not be able to sell, unable to meet an SLA, customer sentiment, loss of reputation, loss of customer trust. Yeah. So I guess the summary here for impact is that what impact means to you for your company or service or business or whatever the service in question is obviously different. So how you summarize it is really up to your product area. Excuse me. Okay. Timeline. This one usually has some graphs in it as well. But just before I even read this, to give you kind of a summary of what this is probably going to say, I haven't read it yet, but it's usually timestamps. It's timestamp 2:54 p.m., whatever. This happened, and this happened. And then, engineer was engaged. Engineer signed on and checked in. Engineer identified the problem. Engineer realized that this, and this was a corrective measure. Engineer performed the corrective measure. The corrective measure did not work. So it's kind of like a timeline of everything that happened. And this is why as well, when this is a good kind of tangential point. We have a ticketing system internally, and I think most other companies do. When you have these kinds of issues, in order to rebuild the timeline, it's important to have really good documentation on the ticket itself. So usually people will jump on a conference call, right, and start talking about things. But in the postmortem, a lot of things can get lost if you didn't document them anywhere, right? And so it's really, really important, on the ticket itself, to say what was found, at the time and what you are doing. So like, here's what I found. Here's the logs of what I found. Here's what I think we should do, and here's what we're doing now, right? So you kind of have something you can refer to later that gives you some insight into your thought process as the event was unfolding, as opposed to trying to rebuild that later, which is usually pretty difficult to do. So take good documentation, take good notes during the event itself. It'll pay dividends when you're trying to reconstruct it later. Okay. The timeline. The timeline describes all of the events that occur during the incident. It covers from the first event related to the incident until the moment that the system returned to normal operations. The timeline shows a clear picture of everything that happened and all of the events and information that were available during the incident. The quality of the output of the correction of error exercise depends on the quality of the data that is used to build it, which is exactly what I just said. In addition to like the bullet list that they're about to talk about right here, you will see graphs, and the graphs can show, like, for example, error rates or request rates, right? And maybe if your event was triggered by a deployment, you'll have like a vertical line that says, here's when the deployment started, here's when it ended, and then you'll see, like, you know, the error rate start to spike up and stay up, or the request rate have a higher percentage of errors, or maybe your latency started to increase. So you have all these markers on the graphs. It's really good to have graphs in these because they help you visualize what actually happened during the outage. The timeline is recommended to be a bullet list that walks through what happened and when. It is important to compile a detailed timeline. This helps the author and the reviewers understand how the incident was managed. When establishing the timeline, it's important to take into account the following. Represent the sequence of events in chronological order. Be consistent with the time zone of the sequence of events. Usually UTC is the standard, at least for us. The timeline should focus on the event, including the start time and the end time, not just the team's perception of the event. The timeline should start with the first trigger that led to the problem. For example, a bad deployment, not just when your team got notified. Make sure any gaps in your timeline of more than 10 to 15 minutes are clearly explained in the future sections of the COE. This is why it's good to have good documentation so that you can rebuild this and not have these big gaps. Each entry in the timeline should clearly follow from the previous one. The timeline tells a story to the others about the incident. When documenting times, be sure to include a time zone and make sure that you're using it correctly, PDT versus PST. Better yet, use UTC, or omit the middle letter of the time zone. Use data support as much as possible, link to external items and images, so graphs or deployment links or whatever is necessary to give additional context. Okay. So that's it for timeline. By the way, if you have more questions, please feel free to drop them in. I'll try my best to answer them as I go along. Metrics. This section contains the metrics that define the impact, how you determine the problem, and how you are set up to monitor the event. If these metrics are absent, then that's a red flag and likely a good action item to include them in later sections. So often you'll find in a lot of COEs too, like they're lacking a metric on a particular thing. You usually see this in COEs that happen where the tech team didn't know that it was a problem. Usually the identification of the problem is an external trigger, like a social media post or something happening from outside, like an email to the company from some upset user. Like usually it's social media in this era, let's be honest here. But it's interesting because when this happens, it's usually an indication that's like, the first question is, why didn't you guys know that this was a problem, right? And if you don't have the metric on the thing, then it's like, well, that's obviously going to be an action item for us. So it's important to have good metrics, good dashboards, good alarms, not just system health metrics, because that's just one category of things, but also like business metrics, like order volume charts or, I don't know, number of databases being provisioned if you're an infrastructure team or service or whatever. So make these types of metrics custom, dependent on what your problem area is. Okay. Incident questions. Once we have a timeline, start asking questions to analyze the event and start identifying key aspects of the incident. Questions should focus on the key aspects of the incident, such as the following. So usually these are like pre-canned questions that are just part of the section, and you just kind of like drill down. Sometimes you'll answer a question and there's like a natural follow-up. So you anticipate that, and then you say it like, okay, like you ask yourself the question and you give the answer. So that's something that is pretty common as well. So when did you learn that there was customer impact? How did you learn there was customer impact? This is what I was just talking about, reported by the customer. This is never a good thing. Identified by monitoring and or alerting. How can we reduce the time to detect it in half? So this is more of a mental exercise to think through, like if you had some chart or some additional metric, how would you, well, a chart or a metric would have let you detect it in half. So you would say, we could have had a metric on X. Actually, take these off. I'm getting hot in here. Diagnosis. What was the underlying cause of the customer impact? Was an external activity, a maintenance window, happening during the incident? What is MW? I don't know what that means. Maintenance window. Oh, okay. Properly announced. Did the service owner know about the maintenance window? Is there a task or backlog? Okay, these are just like contextual questions on diagnosis. Mitigation. This is kind of the sequence of steps that you took to mitigate it. When did the customer impact return to the pre-incident levels? How does the system owner know that the system is properly restored? Usually based on charts, logs, metrics. Usually in these kinds of events, you have like, you look at metrics that are like a week or 3 days usually, or a week out. You see like, usually they have a cyclical trend where they're like that. And then it's like straight down or straight up, depending on which metric you're looking at. It's like, oh shit, like obviously something broke here. And then you'll see like, okay, it's returning back to normal again. That's kind of what they're asking here. How did you determine where and how to mitigate the problem? Usually it's not always super clear when you're in the moment. And so usually you'll see like, you'll try things, right? And this actually makes me want to talk about something slightly related, which is problem mitigation, right? Like to be in a high SEV event, like I've been in some nasty ones in the past, right? Where there's hundreds of people on a call and it's my service that is impacted. This has happened multiple times. And it's like super, super stressful because you own the thing, right? You're the one that knows the most about it. And you got to figure out like, what is happening? How am I going to fix it? There's people asking questions like, when is this going to be resolved? What's the problem? There's like VPs signing on, asking for summaries. It's like a shit show. And it's super stressful, right? Obviously, and it's like your anxiety gets pumped up and your adrenaline gets going, and like you're paging your other team, like quickly trying to just like put together ideas. You're looking at database logs and request logs and like trying to put together a strategy of how you're going to fix this thing. And I always think about after these types of events happen and when they're over, like how could we have been better prepared? And something that I realized, I don't know, a couple of years ago that I never used to do, but I started doing at some point. Did my camera go out again? Hold on, guys. I'm sorry. I was on a good roll there, too. Okay. I swear I'm going to throw this thing up. Where was I? Oh yeah, something that I didn't do in the past, but I started doing more of a couple of years ago, which is being a little bit more proactive about failure modes of my system, which is like what are the different ways that my system could fail? Thinking about it, not while like we're in an outage, but like what would happen if X broke? Like what would I do, right? What would be my first steps that I would take to try and fix this problem? Or what if Y broke? What would I do? Or what if like X and Y broke? Or what if this core dependency had an issue and was throwing excessive errors? Or what if I had all these retries and it was leading to, some kind of impact? It really depends on what your system is and does, but just thinking about this stuff in advance so that if something like that does happen, you'll at least have some kind of indication or intuition of what you should do next. But yeah, those kinds of events were always scary. And that's why like a lot of people even now you get like anxiety when you go on call, because if you get paged and it's like one of those events that it's like, oh God, is this going to be something that I'm going to be up for 6 hours for, or is this just like a false alarm? But yeah, Marlon, indeed you were. Marlon, do I know you at work? I don't know. My main challenge is external dependencies. This is a skill they don't teach in school. Yeah, that's true. Like you never hear about this, and you don't even realize that you should be doing this until like someone tells you. I think someone told me about this actually, like a really experienced engineer. I was like, that is genius. Yeah, so I guess the lesson for you guys, if you don't already do this, think about your own system. Like, what if something fails? What do I do? Right, so that you're not scrambling in the moment. Okay, let's keep it moving. The system manager, blah, 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 template contains some of these questions. If you use a template, you can add additionals. Okay, such as prevention. How would we prevent it? We must completely understand not only what happened, but why it happened, as well as the underlying causes. Only once we dig down multiple levels do we have enough information to truly prevent the event from occurring again. And the mechanism we use at Amazon to determine the root cause is the 5 whys. This is the big one. This is where you really get to the meat of the problem. How much longer is this? Okay, it's mostly indented. We're almost there. Okay. So I think I already briefly touched on what the 5 whys are, but just to give you a brief summary. The 5 whys are a way, and it's usually more than 5 whys, and you can like branch off into multiple directions. It's kind of like a tree where it's like you start with a question and then like you say like, why did this happen? Like, okay, for this reason. And maybe the answer to the next question is for 2 different reasons. And so you go off on like an A and B path, and then it kind of like goes down the page in like 2 tangential paths, and eventually they converge. But essentially you just keep on asking yourself, why did this happen? Like, why did that next thing happen? Why did that third thing happen? Until you bottom out on the eventual root cause. So let's see this in action here. The 5 whys is useful as it provides a consistent approach to understanding causes. It helps overcome assumptions that we might have. The process is easy to learn and use, either as an individual or with the whole team. The 5 whys should be applied in a blame-free way, focused on finding out why rather than blaming who. Okay, they keep on referencing this thing. Use the 5 whys technique to make sure that you have identified the actual causes of a problem. You may need to ask more than 5 whys to find the causes, and you should consider if a cause could have been prevented. For example, if you see human error as a root cause in the root cause analysis, it may be indicating a lack of checking or fail-safe mechanisms. Therefore, you should always ask why the human error was possible. The 5 whys is how you establish your action items, by the way, if that wasn't already clear. So let's go through this actually, and I'll explain it as we go. So first, you identify the problem, right? It's a one statement. It's like, what was the outage, right? Like X and Y in service went down, causing such and such customer impact. Why did that happen? Why did X and Y service go down, right? Well, it went down because we had a high error rate. Okay, maybe that's the answer to the next question. Assume that. And then your next question is, well, why did you have a higher error rate? It's like, well, the database that we use was experiencing lock contention, for example. Then the next question is, well, why was your database experiencing lock contention? And maybe it's like maybe the answer to that is some like query pattern, or maybe like certain customers were all competing for the same lock, or maybe it's an internal bug or something like that, or some combination. But like you can see how the problem is getting more and more specific, or the questions are getting more and more specific, and eventually you're going to really narrow down on what the real problem was. And that's how you get to the action item. So if this case, it was like contention between threads, right? That was like the final answer of why your database was having problems, which led to the errors, which led to the outage. Then what's the action item there? How do you prevent that from happening going forward? And that would be as one of the action items on the COE, where you would mark it as some kind of priority with a due date of how you would go and fix it. So this is just like talking about the chain of asking whys. And like I said, like often this can branch in multiple directions if something has like multiple answers as to why. I've seen this done many, many times. Continue this process until you're confident you've covered the complete chain of events that allowed the event to occur, regardless of how many whys it takes. Create a plan to remediate each of the answers to the whys. This will remediate the symptom of the event, as well as the chain of events that allowed the event to take place. For example, okay, they give an example, great. The problem is X. Why did X happen? X happened because this action took place. Why did the action take place? The action took place because there was a typo. Why was the typo allowed? Typo was allowed because there was no validation. Why was there no validation? So this is a process problem. The current process does not validate the code. Why doesn't the current process validate the code? The shell used to input the code does not have that feature. Boom. There's your action item. You implement a feature to add validation to the shell, right? Crystal clear. After each why is answered, consider the following questions to determine whether the process must continue. If necessary, repeat the process using the reason as the problem. Stop when you are confident that you have found the root causes. Wait a second. Is the reason for the why the underlying root cause? Could the reason have been detected before it happened? Is the reason human error? This part's a little bit confusing to me, but hold on. What are they saying? In the example above, there are 5 takeaways that must be addressed. Oh, okay, yeah. Usually you'll see like a TLDR section of this, which is like, here are the key things that need to be addressed, or like the key action items. So they have 5 of them here. Action items. So we talked about this ad nauseum, but these are the main results of the COE process. The goal is to identify actionable activities that improve either the prevention, diagnosis, or resolution of the root cause of the same problem in the future. Each action item must state its priority, who is the person responsible, and a due date for when it will be finished. Good action items are specific and achievable within a specific timeline. For example, an internal SLA might be 14 days, and COEs have on average, 6 to 8 action items. Another thing to note too is that these action items, you can assign an action item to not just your team, but an external team. So if something happened that is the result of some other team's deficiency or issue, it's not just your team that's in scope of the COE action items. Like you can actually assign them to other teams, at least at Amazon, that is, and they take it as seriously as you do, right? It's going to be prioritized and scrutinized if they don't finish it on time. So that's one of the nice things about these mechanisms too. It's kind of like a group mentality where it's not just like the author of the COE that's doing the action items. It could be external teams too, if that's truly where the cause was. Another really nice thing about this process too is that usually there's lessons learned based on the outage, right? So maybe it was like, for example, a particular version of some dependency, like some library that you used in a particular setup that caused some, that was one of the bottom line 5 whys or bottom line root causes. There's then action items to like send out announcements and send out, publications to other teams that have these types of similar setups to notify them of that, so that if they have, a similar setup, then they should, take some action to remediate it as well. So it doesn't just stop with the team. It's very well socialized. And that's why it's very interesting to subscribe to the COE. There's like a mailing list that you can subscribe to whenever a public COE, public in the sense of internal to Amazon public, where it's not marked as like private or, for certain people's eyes only. You get emails automatically when they get publicized, and they don't get written often enough where it like spams your inbox. But I usually just like read the topic of it. I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. I just bookmark it and come back to it later. But honestly, like a suggestion for all of you, if you work at a company that has this kind of mechanism, go and read these things, man. Like you learn so much from reading these kind of postmortems and incident summaries. It's very, very interesting. It'll make you a better engineer 100%. It's something that you can learn lessons from and apply and like talk to your team about too, and start discussions. And, you know, it would be great to go to your manager with like, hey, Joe, I read this COE and it's like, there's this interesting thing that I found, and we actually have something similar in our system. And, you know, this seems like something that we should do something about, right? Like maybe we should be proactive here. If you go to your manager and you say that, it's like, damn, good on you, man. That's a really good thing, like as a manager to hear. So it really just shows that you're determined to be better, and not just personally, but also your team as well. So go and read COEs of other companies as well, not just necessarily your own company. The Azure tech blog or whatever has COEs. Netflix does it as well, if I recall. I'm waiting for the one, by the way, on the Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, whatever the hell that guy's name, because the streaming quality was really bad during that like stupid boxing match. I didn't watch it, but I heard about it. So I'm waiting for that to happen. Like I want to read that just out of morbid curiosity. But go read COEs. They're very, very interesting, and not enough people do them, or read them, that is. Okay, I'm just going to go grab some water, and then when I come back, we're going to talk about enterprise dev practices. So I'll be right back in like 2 minutes. Okay. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's talk about now enterprise dev practices. Just like, what are the types of things that you do as a developer at some of these big companies? And if you have questions, by the way, please ask me, because I'm going to run out of ideas pretty quickly. I haven't really thought about this at all yet, so this is going to be like off the cuff. Just get set up here. Let's talk about development, I guess, first. Development. Something to know. What's something we could talk about here? Oh, code reviews. Code reviews. This is something that's mandatory. You must have code reviews. Code reviews, for those of you that haven't heard the term before, I believe most of you probably have, but before you push your code, you must have someone that approves it. You can't just go ahead and push it. You put it up as a PR first. You get comments. Usually there can be revisions that, you know, people comment on, like, why are you doing this or that? And you need to address them. It's not like forced for you to address them, but like if you don't address them, then people will just be like, what the hell are you doing? And then eventually once things are approved, then you can go ahead and push them. And you may ask yourself, like, what's just stopping me from pushing stuff? Like, who's going to notice if I do stuff? You should understand that it's not just good intentions here. There are pipeline blockers set up that automatically validate that a CR, that we call them CRs, has an associated approval with it. And it won't even proceed in the pipeline unless it does. So for example, here is your your source, right? And you push like some commit to it. So like say this is me and I push some commit to it. Our pipeline will auto build, like it'll detect that a new version was just pushed and it'll trigger an auto build, right? So like the auto build always happens. We don't get blocked at that point, right? So the source gets pushed to, and then we build. And this is all through internal tooling, right? So there's a build process here. As part of the build process, there's unit tests that get run, right? So there's unit tests. There's also like other things that are applied as well. You can have like code analysis, like unit test code coverage percentages. If it drops beyond a certain percentage, then like fail the build basically, or like succeed the build, but like don't proceed to the next step. So like we can call that static analysis, I suppose. Static analysis. And this is where the CR validation comes in as well. CR validation. And all of these things need to succeed, right? This needs to succeed, this needs to succeed, this needs to succeed in order for this thing to go to the next step, which is usually like the first step of the, well, not the first step, but the first environment of the pipeline. For us, it's something that's usually called beta, or test is another name. And then usually like run, sorry, I'm talking about like a lot of different topics here right now, but this is just a little bit about how it works. And then beta, you have a deployment, it goes to beta, the service starts up with everything. You usually run integ tests here, or integration tests. Sometimes people will call them functional tests, I suppose, integration tests. That whole thing is a little bit, the language is confusing. Anyways, these integration tests get run. If that succeeds, then it proceeds to the next environment. And then eventually, there's like the next one is usually called gamma. The closer you go to the right here, the more it gets closer to prod. I think I'm running out of space for you guys. How do I move right? There we go. Nice. And then it goes to prod after this. But anyways, we were talking about CR validation. So this is baked into the pipeline itself so that you can't bypass this. Of course, there are emergencies where you can bypass this, but it triggers email notifications. It triggers like this big red thing on the pipeline that anyone that goes to the website to look at the pipeline of your service will immediately see. So it's something that if you do it and you do it too often, it's like, well, this person is going to get in trouble eventually. Marlon says, I'm working more actively in engineering quality lately and really enjoying your channel. Thanks, Marlon. Yeah, that's code reviews, if you were wondering. There's also, actually, this is kind of like put me on a couple different topics here. Integration tests, right? And maybe we should talk about unit tests first, because that's like kind of first step for this. Unit tests are 100% a requirement. So if you try to put out a CR without unit tests, people just won't even look at it. Do I work in Amazon? Yes, I do. I've worked there for 10 years as a software engineer. Now I'm a manager, but yeah. Yeah, unit tests are mandatory. They must be done. There's not necessarily any rules on code coverage percent, because beyond a certain percent, they start to become a little bit redundant. but they are required for like the core test flows. And we have tools that will show us on the code review page if a certain code path does not have full unit test coverage. So it's very easy to see if someone hasn't tested a path. Like you can tell by looking at the test yourself, but it's very clear if that happens. So unit tests are mandatory. I'll just mark this. Mandatory. And same with code reviews. If you don't write them, you will be in trouble. Integration tests, a little bit gray area. They are preferred to have. And when I say integration tests, I mean like, okay, this is where like some people are going to throw a hissy fit, because maybe what I say is an integration test is like a functional test, or like there's different types of these types of tests. When I say integration test, it's like your service starts and you're testing like end to end. Does it do what it's supposed to do by calling the actual services that it's supposed to call? So no mocking, no like faking calling a dependency as you would in a unit test. You actually call the thing. Like if your system processes messages from an SQS queue, then you'll publish a message to your queue, and then your system will internally read it, right? So that's what I consider an integration test. Usually you have a suite of them that are like core end-to-end tests for each of the main like functionalities of your service. And they also test your dependencies, dependencies being external dependencies, so maybe other services that you need to call, also like databases and message processors, those kinds of things. These are like strongly encouraged to have. Encouraged. They're not necessarily mandatory, and it's really team dependent. So I'll give you an example. I was recently working on a project with a team where we were doing this like high visibility project, and we needed to deliver it rather quickly. So we kind of skimped on the integration tests a little bit. We just set up some like very basic ones on the core code path, but it wasn't robust at all. And actually we had like a problem with the system because something wasn't tested correctly. And eventually we revisited it, and we're in the process right now of adding more robust integration tests so that we can have a lot more confidence. But eventually what happens is that when you have good enough integration tests, then you can get to CI and CD, which is like chef's kiss, right? That's the gold standard. Every team wants CI, CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. If you haven't heard of this term before, we were talking about this like pipeline up here, right? Of like how, you push code into your source branch, and then it goes to build, and then it goes to beta, and then it goes to gamma, and then it goes to prod, right? In a non-CI CD pipeline, what you'll have are like people that need to approve certain steps. So once it gets to beta, for example, someone needs to come along and like approve it, right? And that'll trigger the deployment to gamma. Then once that code is on gamma, someone needs to come and approve it. And then it'll go to prod, right? And once it's on prod, like you're pretty much done. When you have CI/CD set up, you basically have, integration tests that are run, and therefore you have such confidence that your integration tests are so good and cover the important cases for your system that you can just let this baby flow, right? So anytime someone pushes something to source, automatically rebuilds, automatically goes to beta, the tests run, it gets deployed to gamma. Usually you run the tests again on gamma, and then it goes to prod. This allows you to develop and test and push code very, very quickly. And you can also usually run these integration tests on your local machine as well, not just on the beta or gamma environments. You can run this locally too. So that's how you kind of know that your stuff is going to work before you hit these other environments or before you even put something out for CR. Integration in the context of end-to-end or API contract testing. End-to-end. End-to-end. Which is a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, right? It's not trivial to set this stuff up, but if you have services that are going to be there for a while that your team is going to be investing in and adding functionality on top of for a long time going forward, it's worthwhile to set this up. I try to encourage teams to do this all the time. And like a lot of services can exist for a really long time without CI/CD, but once you get it set up and working, it just makes your life so much easier. It allows you to catch so many issues before they actually become an issue in production. Actually, this happens all the time. This has happened to me recently. It's like one of the services that we own doesn't have CI/CD. And before I joined the team, they were working on this feature and, eventually got deployed and rolled out, and it broke some stuff, right? And no one even knew that it broke some stuff for a really long time. And so we had to write a COE about it. So the perfect perfect connection to what we were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, this is why it's important to have this process, right? It's important to have CI/CD because you can catch these things before they even become a problem. But it's always something that's like not necessarily done as part of the project itself. It's always something that like can get kicked down the road for the team to want to pick up later. But these things get deprioritized, and when you're operating these big companies like OE or operational excellence, things that we consider like, unit tests or improvements to our tech stack, addressing tech debt, they're always one of the first things to get deprioritized. But any good manager should be pushing for team to have time and effort to focus on these things because they are almost as equal as important as product asks or enhancements to the systems. Okay. What else do you guys want to know in terms of enterprise dev practices? Someone asked me this question on, to talk about this on my channel here. So here I am. Any requests? And I'll try to think of some things as I go here. Should we talk about scaling? It's something we can talk about. No, I know a better one. How do I phrase this correctly? We have an internal name for this, but I don't want to use those names because I don't want to get in trouble for anything. But effectively, it's a audit. Let's call it a system audit. System audit. And it's something that we do multiple times a year. And okay, I'm just deliberating internally of how much detail I should give here without, because I don't know if this information is publicly available or not. But essentially, you audit your system, right? Everything about your system. So it's like a document that you need to fill out effectively twice a year or multiple times a year. Every org is different. And it has different sections, right? Some sections are like the overview of the system. It's like, what is this service or system responsible for? What does this thing do? And here's a diagram of how it works, right? We have different things that call this and that. It's connected to this. We use this kind of database and it has some descriptions, right? That's usually the overview. And then you have different topics about it. So you can have topics on scaling, right? And the scaling section may talk about, does your system operate on vertical scaling? Is your primary unit of work vertical scaling or horizontal scaling? Horizontal scaling. This is always a contentious topic too, because some people don't necessarily understand the difference between the two. But what vertical scaling means is that it's not necessarily in the form of infrastructure. A lot of people think this applies to infrastructure, right? Because that's naturally what people mean when they say horizontal versus vertical scaling. But what we're really talking about here is unit of work for vertical versus horizontal. Unit of work. And so a system would be considered vertically scaling in the form of unit of work is that if your volume grows, then your system needs to work harder in order to get through that volume. Okay. So like the stack gets bigger. Like I'm trying to find a good way of explaining this. So like say you process stuff, right? And now you need to process more stuff. Do you need to work harder now to get through this stack? Okay. This is an example of vertical scaling units of work. But a horizontal example would be you're basically distributing it across different slabs, right? And usually this is like a preferred approach, because if something fails in the processing of like any one of these other ones could take over. So like this is like some of the questions that are here. There's also like questions on the scaling properties of your system. So like how many threads do you have, right, for your service? How many connections on your load balancer? What are the timeouts? Right? All these very, very detailed questions on basically how the system operates. And there's another section that's all about alarms. And this is basically a full audit of like all the alarms in your system. What are the P50s? What are the P90s? What are the P99s? Do you have latency alarms? Do you have error alarms? Do you have aggregate alarms that cover both? All right. Do you have alarms on the load balancers? Do you have alarms on the databases? Do you have alarms on your message processing queues? It's like so comprehensive to answer all these questions, right? I'm sure I'm missing some, but that's another section. And then there's stuff on logging. Believe it or not, a lot of COEs come out of problems with logging, usually related to disk usage. Because a lot of these big systems that have lots of throughput, they don't flush their logs often enough, or they're logging too much stuff. And then their disk ends up filling up. And so then it causes the system to like basically blow up and stop working. So yeah, this is like another thing. And this asks about like, what are, do you have like comprehensive logging? Do you have, is your data scrubbed for like sensitive or confidential information in your logging? So this is other stuff that's covered there as well. Yeah, so that's a little bit about like the system audit process. And then there's like some sections that are dedicated specifically to certain services, because services like Kinesis or Lambda or whatever may have like special questions that need to be answered because they're very specific to those services. What else can we talk about here? Enterprise dev practices. Talked about code reviews, talked about pipelines, talked about unit tests. Oh, design documents. Yes. This one is close to my heart. Design documents. Is there specific requirements for accounting softwares? I don't know if I follow your question, Marlon. Do you mean like for this stuff, for the system audit, like specific requirements for your answers? If that's what you mean, then yes. Like these get audited by other engineers too. So it's not like you just fill them out and forget about them. It's like actual people that look at it later. Yeah, feel free to ask more if I didn't answer your question. Design documents. So this is something that's like super important that Amazon in particular is very heavy, very design or writing heavy. So if you're not a good writer, then and you're joining Amazon, you should probably start practicing. In audit logs. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out what you mean. I'll continue on design documents. Maybe I'll come back to that. Yeah, so design documents are something that we write. Generally, there's two forms. There's an HLD or high-level design, right? And of course, it depends on the scope of the feature that you're building out. Like high-level designs are usually something that are written for larger projects. Usually when there's like multiple teams as dependencies or are involved, right? And their primary purpose is to like, you can have multiple like iterations of a design document too, but like usually the first round, there's multiple rounds, so to speak, of reviews, is like to get alignment, right? That's the goal. Get alignment from the respective teams that are going to be involved, and also like the product people that are requesting this feature too. So like these types of documents, usually they'll give a background of what you're trying to solve, like what's the business problem that we're solving here, like what are we trying to do, and then there'll be some kind of like proposal section, right? And this is going to be your main body of the document itself. There'll usually be like some kind of before proposal, there is current state, right? Current state. This is how the system works today and what it does. And then after that, there is the proposal, right? And your current state will usually like highlight what, is relevant. You don't include all the details there, but you include what's relevant for the problem area at hand. Then you have your proposal, which is, it usually starts with an architecture diagram, and then you have, depending on what's in the architecture diagram and like the scope of things that are going to be changed, you may have like new APIs that you need to create, like new integrations. Could be a whole new service that needs to get built to do a function that doesn't exist today, right? And usually when you're talking about these things too, you lay out options. So like option one, option two, and then you usually mark one or the other with preferred to say like, this is the one that I think that we should go with. So it's important to take a stance as well and not just be like, hey, here's the options. Someone tell me which one I should do. You should have a suggestion of which one you think is the right one, but you don't necessarily always have to be right. That's up for debate. And then you also see like sequence diagrams as part of this. Sequence diagrams. Usually in the appendix, but sometimes in the body as well. Because sequence diagrams, I have a video on this, by the way. You should watch it on my channel if you've never seen a sequence diagram or don't use them, because they are extremely, extremely helpful. Please use sequence diagrams. You'll see these in the appendix because they do a really good job of getting everyone on the same page of exactly how the system is going to work. But essentially, it's like all about getting alignment. That's like the main purpose of these, right? To like get everyone on board. It's like, okay, you guys need to make this change. We need to make this change. Here are the different APIs that are going to change. Here's what the inputs and outputs are going to look like. You don't need to figure out every single detail here in the HLD. That's not the point. It's all about getting alignment. The next step that happens after the HLD, usually for like a big project, you have one engineer that knows about the different spaces that are going to be touched, right? Or does the research to figure that out. And so say, for example, there's like 3 different teams that are involved, like A, B, and C, right? These are the 3 teams that are going to need to make changes. After the HLD review, you'll have these 3 teams go and write their own LLD, which is what's called a low-level document. HLD is high-level document, high. LLD is low-level, high-level. So these guys will write their own, and these guys will write their own. And this is where like the specific details are discussed for the respective systems in question. Remember that like these companies usually operate on like a service-oriented architecture. So there's usually like, 5, 6, 7 people for each of these different teams here. So the whole team is generally invited to the review for the respective service that's being changed, right? And it's the same thing for the other teams as well. Like they have their own team that comes to B team's review, and then there's another team that goes to A team's review. But the low-level designs are the ones where it's like the precise details of what's going to be changed, right? Oh, there's going to be like a new field in our database, or there's going to be like this API, or we're going to build a new API, or we're going to have this message processor, or we're going to add some Kinesis stream that does this and stores the data here and then does that. So this happens with much more detail, much more scrutiny. And then as part of the low-level designs, the other thing that's like useful for managers are like the milestones, right? An expectation here is you break this proposal apart into separate chunks. So it's like, okay, first step is maybe, I'm trying to think of an example. It's like, there's like a data processing layer, right? And then this has like component, like piece of work 1, piece of work 2, piece of work 3, right? And then after that, there's like, okay, now we need to do, or maybe database changes should have gone first, but whatever. Now there's like database updates, right? Database updates. So that's a second work stream. And then maybe the third work stream is like API, like new API or revisit old ones, right? And so you break this apart into like different sections. And then it's also very useful to also talk about the parallelization factor. So like how parallelizable are these tasks or these pieces of work? Because this will help your manager like figure out how fast can we do this, right? So when you're putting together your milestones, you'll say like, okay, for data processing, we have task 1, 2, and 3. This is going to take like, I don't know, 20 weeks, making numbers up here. Database updates, that's simple. That's going to take 5 weeks. API updates, that's going to take like, I don't know, 10 weeks, right? And then maybe data processing and database updates are parallelizable, right? So you can have 2 people, 1 person working on data processing, 1 person working on database updates. But then you have this kind of system or structure where API work can't begin until both of the things before it are done, right? So you have this kind of dependency structure, right? So 2 people can work on the first 2, but then only once that is done can people work on APIs. So having this kind of thought out process is helpful for your managers so they can like associate resources well. And not just be like throwing people at a problem and like then people figure out like, oh, actually I'm blocked and I can't do anything because Johnny didn't update the database. So this is something to think about too if you're putting these types of documents together. It's always good to have milestones and these types of things there. Another good thing too is like metrics that you should add. Oh, I don't think you can see this. There we go. So like, what are the important metrics? These could be like system metrics. They can also be business metrics. This should be part of a low-level design. Similar to the high-level design, there's also options on the details, right? And this is for your team to discuss. Say like, okay, there's option 1, there's option 2, which one, like my preferred is option 1. Here's the pros, here's the cons, right? Same thing for option 2, pros and cons. Usually you'll see some kind of discussion of like, okay, this one is a lot easier, right? It's only 10 weeks of work versus this one is like 20 weeks of work, but this one, despite being more work, it can lead us in a better spot going forward because the solution is more extensible. So that's where like the discussion on with your team is important because, and like also how many resources you have available from your manager, because this will help you like decide which approach do you want to take, right? What else is part of design documents that I'm missing? Oh, okay. Not about design documents. I want to take this in a different direction now. Other stuff that is like pretty standard. Stand-ups. Stand-ups. And sprints. Sprints and sprint planning. So stand-ups are, I think they're pretty standard these days. Almost every company does them now. If you don't, you should really be thinking about doing them. But for those of you that are not aware, it's basically like 30-minute meeting at usually the beginning, early part of the day, depending on when people sign on. And you basically talk about like what happens previously. Like you go round robin, right? You start with one person. That person talks about what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, any blockers that came up, or like things that they need help with, or even like interesting things that they discovered, right? Like let's call them insights. And this is really where like good team culture can start building. Like the insights part is always the fun part, right? Or blockers is like something, it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. Has anyone encountered this type of error that I've never seen? Usually you can get some help. And then, so basically you go one by one and you use some kind of software for this. It's not just like people talking. Usually there's a board, like an Asana board or a Jira board, depending on what tech you guys use. We use our own custom stuff, but whatever, they're all the same effectively. And you mark like, okay, I spent 2 points. We use 2 points per day. 1 point corresponds to like a half day. So you have 2 per day. And you say, okay, I spent 2 points here working on this, or 1 point on this one. And then I was waiting for a review. So I worked 1 point on the other one. This one's pending CR. Can someone take a look? And you talk about, what you were working on and anything that came up. There's also like the post scrum or post stand up. And this is kind of like open forum, right? For you to talk about whatever, problem, thing that you saw that was interesting. Someone came to you and asked you a particular question that you're not really sure of and you want to gather people's thoughts on. This is where it all happens. And this is a really important thing, stand-ups in general, because it helps. Like you're a team of 5 to 8 usually at these companies. So like it's hard for everyone to keep in touch with what's going on. And it's important for people to know what's going on because you want to share knowledge and you want to have like knowledge spread out across the team. You don't want to create silos in the sense that like only one person knows everything. You want to create a culture of learning and helping each other and like being better as a group. So that's why stand-ups, like a really good secondary benefit of stand-ups beyond just like the accountability and tracking purpose. They're also helpful for your manager to like identify any roadblocks or like if projects are on track or falling behind, those kinds of things. And then there's sprints. Sprints are usually 2 weeks long, at least for us. We have a planning process that happens at the beginning on the Monday of the sprint. It's usually like 1.5 hours long. I know it's kind of long and you'd be like, WTF with that, mate. But yeah, there's a lot of things that we do. It's not just planning. There's a retro is usually what we start with. So we talk about like, hey, what happened in the previous sprint? What did we accomplish? Let's give people credit for things. So there's like a kudos. There was like a well done section. And then there's a to improve section where we talk about like, this didn't go so well, or like our ticket queue is growing. Like we need to do something about that, right? So that's one part of it. Another part of it is capacity, right? Where you say, hey, anyone taking any vacation? How many days is everyone going to be here? Are there any holidays coming up? So everyone puts this into a table. You come out with a number that's like, I don't know, maybe it's depending on how many people you have and how you calculate it. If you use points per day per person or 2 points per day per person, maybe you'll come up with like 60 odd points or something. And so now, it's like, okay, we have 60 points worth of work that we can bring into this sprint. And then when you're bringing your tasks in, right, you'll usually have them pre-estimated. You can see this. Yeah, you can. Task placement or task ingestion into your sprint. You'll either pre-estimate or estimate them on the spot, right? So you kind of know what your priorities are for the sprint because your manager tells you what your priorities are, or it's just carryover from the previous sprint to close certain tasks out. So you will bring tasks in, right? So like maybe task A takes, and I'm going to use some extreme examples here. Task A takes, 10 points worth, right? The 10 can either be determined previously, or you can have we use a democratic process where the person that created the task will talk about what it is, explain what the exit criteria is, and then answer any questions if people have and they want to know what's going on. And then we'll basically vote, right? So some people will come up and say okay, I think this is X amount of points, this amount of points, whatever. And usually we take the higher number. But if there's any it's more often than not around the same. But if you have a lot of people saying say it's 5 points and most people are saying 5 points and one person is saying 2 points, we'll ask this person hey, why'd you say 2 points here, right? It's not we're making the person feeling dumb. Just are we missing something? Is this a lot easier than what we thought, or are we crazy here? So that's what happens there. Another thing too is that you don't want these estimates to be, or these tasks to be too big. Generally, you'll see an informal rule where anything that is 8+ points, 1 point being half a day of work, by the way, if I haven't said it already, you can't have any task that's greater than 8 points. If you have a task that's greater than 8 points, you need to break it up into 2 different tasks. That's our rule. Because the reasoning is that this is too coarse grained. And if something is going to take you 4 days in this case, then you really should be separating this out into 2 separate things. So that's the thought process there. So then you add a bunch of these tasks, right? You keep on adding these. And then you effectively stop whenever you hit 60, right? And that's how you know how much you should take, right? And then as part of the retro, right, we talked about having a retro. Usually what you'll do is you'll look at the previous sprint and be like, okay, what was our capacity in the previous sprint? How many points worth of tasks did we bring in? Did we accomplish everything? Maybe you did, right? Maybe you completed all the 60 points. Maybe you only completed 40 points worth of work, right? Which tells you that if originally you said that you had enough work for 60 points, but you only completed 40, probably means that your estimates were wrong or people were slacking off. It's one or the other. I usually like to give people the benefit of the doubt that our estimates are wrong because, it's not a perfect science. It's hard to estimate software stuff in general. So that's kind of how this process works. Another side topic is on-call. A lot of people don't like talking about this one because it's a pain in the ass. What about unexpected complexity? It's a good question. Sometimes you have some initial assumptions where things you think it's going to work one way or another, but it doesn't end up panning out that way. When that thing tends to happen, that's totally fine. No one's going to hold you to this and say oh, it must be completed in 8 points or 4 points. If things come up that are different, then it's totally okay. I think the expectation is that during the stand-up, you just talk about that. It's hey, actually figured out this is a lot harder. I'm going to create a second task for this because it's a little bit more complicated than I thought. And here's why. And usually no one's going to complain about that unless someone's bullshit meter goes off. But that's generally just part of the process of things of estimating and complexity. On call usually happens like, it depends on the team. Usually you have like between 5 and 8 people. One person per week. The person that's on call is focused on tickets. We have severity guidelines where we have like basically severity 1 through 5. Sev 1 is like nuclear meltdown. Like there's specific criteria of when something is considered a Sev 1. It almost never happens, so it's almost not worth talking about. Like huge impact. If you have a Sev 1, you're writing a COE. It's pretty much automatic. Like lots of customers are impacted. Automatic emails get sent out. Tons of people are joining the call. It's like 911 basically. Your manager automatically gets paged. It's a disaster. Sev 2s are usually like alarms or like critical issues that go off, or like customers are impacted, but it's not like super serious. It's something that you need to deal with. You'll get paged for this, right? So you usually need to wake up in the middle of the night or stop what you're doing and get on there. You just hope that it's a false alarm when you hear your pager go off. I'm still traumatized by the pager sound for my phone, by the way. It like freaks me out. And then 3 to 5 are less serious. So you don't get paged for these. These are just like kind of normal tickets that you need to handle. 3 is group productivity impaired. 4 is individual impaired, like someone can't do something. And 5 is like basically not really a big issue, just kind of more of a nice to have. Yeah, Sev 0 is a major blast. That's if like Lambda is down, Dynamo is down, or the Amazon.com website is down. That's a Sev 0. Like, or a critical piece of infrastructure like DNS, Route 53, stuff like that. What else? I feel like we've talked about a lot here. Can I zoom out on this? Oh, I can. I really like this. Wow. Whew. This is cool. Talked about a lot here. Any other questions, by the way? What else can I talk about here? I feel like I've been going for a while. Talked about development, system audits, design docs. Scaling is part of that. On-call, sprints, stand-ups. I feel like I'm missing some important things. Maybe it's too late at night. I'm too tired. Metrics, yeah. Metrics are good. Hold on, Ryan asked a related question to something we were just talking about. Can you talk about story refinement? We get very few requests. Stories come in as general topics for the very next sprint, leading to difficulty splitting the stories because we barely understand the topic. Okay, I think I get what you're saying. Ayush, I don't know what you mean by white labeling. If you can tell me what that means, I can answer that better. Okay, story refinement. So the way we do it, and I'm not saying like this is the right way or the wrong way, is that usually on like any one of these teams, so like you have tech teams, right, that own a couple different services. Oh, we should talk about service SOA, service-oriented architecture. I want to come back to that after. But in terms of this specific one, story refinement, we have tech teams, and they say this thing called 2 pizza rule. Oh, requirements, sorry. Let me reread your question. We get very few requirements. Ahmed, no, I'm talking about enterprise dev practices. you can rewatch the stream after, or I'll put like the video will get posted later, and you can watch the whole thing, just like what it's like to be a developer at these big companies. Usually, you have like 6 to 8 teams, or 6 to 8 SDEs on a team, and you also usually have like what's called a PM, product manager, or a PMT, or a technical product manager, which is what the T stands for. So on any team, before you even get the task, before like you take it as input, like you have the requester over here, right? That's like asking for you guys to do the thing. They should be going to your PMT first and be like, hey, I want this thing to be done, right? I want you guys to add this, or I'm asking for you guys to build this feature. What needs to happen is that the PMT and the requester need to work together to refine the requirements. It's like, what is this? Why are we doing this? What is it going to do for us? Do we actually want to accept this thing, or is this something not worth our time? And let's assume that like this gets checkmarked, right? The PMT is like, yeah, this sounds right. This is something that we should do. I think we should do. What should happen then is that your PMT should go to the manager of this team, right? Like, because every team has a SDM, software development manager. So the PMT will go to the SDM and be like, hey, we had this request, right, to do this thing. What do you think about it, right? Do you agree that we should do this thing? Usually, like an SDM will probably accept this most of the times. Like if a PMT already looked at it and accepted it, an SDM like most of the time is going to accept it. Sometimes they won't, but let's just assume that they did here. They'll usually have a better idea of like what this task will actually entail and could poke holes into the request too. But the requirements should already be established at this point when it gets into the developer's hands. Sometimes it's not going to be like super specific and have all the details that you need, but the goal, maybe you'll have UX mocks or like screenshots of like what the feature is going to look like or what it should do and how it should work. And if you don't have that, I would encourage you to go and talk to, like, say you get this new task as an SDE and you're like, I don't really know like how this is going to work. You need to go back to your product person and be like, hey, can you tell me exactly what this is going to look like? Or like, what about this scenario? What's going to happen then? So you have this like iterative process where the product person gives it to the SDE, who gives it to the SDM, who check marks it. The SDM adds it into the sprint. The SDE picks it up. The SDE starts working on it, has questions, goes back to ask the PMT, and then you just like basically go in a circle here where you're asking questions, you're getting answers, you're asking more questions, and you're constantly like developing and refining as you go. So that's what we do. Ryan, I don't know if that's helpful for you, but maybe that's something that you guys can try and set up. Ayush asked, we have a product which we already sell as a SaaS, but now business requirements are coming in to sell it under the branding of other sellers with some variations. We have a product which already sells as SaaS. Oh, do you mean like you sell something, like some core functionality, right? So you have your SaaS. Oh, okay, I think I know what you're talking about. And then it's like, say you have like company A that wants to use it. And so you have like a custom version of it for company A, and then like another custom version of it for company B. You're welcome, Ryan. And then another one for company C. Is this kind of what you're describing, Ayush? Everything is getting increasingly complex to handle in one code base since lots of variations are adding up in our current feature flagging system. Oh God, this is my nightmare. I think I would need to know more about like what you guys build and whether things can be generified, if that's a word. Like, what you don't want to be in a situation is like maybe in the situation that you're in right now, which is like you have lots of if statements, like if A, right, then do this. If B, then do this, right? This is not good. Like this is not going to scale, right? Because every time that you have like a new user or a new company that comes along that wants to use your SaaS, you're going to have another if statement. So the way I've handled this historically is by driving the different behavior through configuration, right? So you can have a configuration driven system that says like for customer A, right? Sorry, let me make some more room here. So like you have your SaaS, right? And for customer A, you want custom functionality for them, right? That does very specific things. You can create like some kind of config system where it's like for customer A, you have like this config that gets passed to them and some kind of like generic implementation that is the same across all the different customers, right? Customer B, customer C, but they all take in this config that's unique to their system, and that drives the different functionality. This is kind of how I've done these types of things in the past, but this is hard to get right. I would need to know more about what you guys do and what you build out. But this is something to think about if it's viable. Niraj or Nirjal asks, how to stay updated? It's so hard right now. I work in 2 companies. You work 2 companies. Oh my God. And I'm kind of a senior dev, but I'm losing that energy of junior. Yeah, this is hard. It happened to me too. It often just happens with life in general as you get older and like more, you have different priorities. You get a family, you get a house, and your priorities change, right? I think you just kind of need to find the motivation, find your outlet to spark your curiosity. Maybe it's side projects. Maybe it's like, what are those things called? Like meetups that you can go to. You can build mechanisms into your life. For example, like maybe you make a rule for yourself. Like every Wednesday at 8 p.m., I'm going to read a tech blog, right? And throughout the week, ACL is access control list usually. And throughout the week, you collect blog links. And on Wednesdays at 8 p.m., you read it for an hour. And that's what you do. And that's how you stay up to speed. And every Wednesday, you keep that up. Developing these mechanisms, I found, are the way to get through these types of things. And then it just becomes a habit at that point, and you can really stay focused. So that's one way to do it, but I don't think there's any right answer. It's got to come from within. Okay, I'll take one more question. It's getting late for me, and I'm kind of tired now, but if you have something you want to know, or a question about me, that's fine too. What do you guys think about these live streams, by the way? I'm just kind of trying out this format. We got a quiet audience here. That's okay. Yeah, if you just joined, you can watch the not the summary, but the video that gets posted automatically for the stream. Oh, okay. A couple of you commented all at once here. First time watching these, and they're really informative. Thank you. Nerdjala says live stream is great. Sad that I have turned off notifications in my phone. Please ring the bell. Ayush loves it. So does Prague. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Marlon asks, okay, this is the last question I'll take before I go. How is the knowledge sharing culture at Amazon? This is really team dependent, to be honest with you, but well, there are tools and things that make it easy for you to get access to information. So for example, there's like an internal YouTube equivalent thing where people post on the internal YouTube, like videos. They call it broadcast. And there's like a particularly good thing for engineers. It's called like Principles of Amazon, where there's principal engineers that put together presentations once a week. And it's like all sorts of interesting topics. And these are really smart guys and girls that talk about all sorts of things. So there's stuff like that that's like very, very interesting to read up on. And the other thing I really like about these companies is that they're very transparent. So for example, one of the things I used to do more often, I don't do this as much anymore, is like I'd be curious about how certain AWS services actually work. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go find the wiki for AWS Kinesis. We have a wiki system at work. And we're like, okay, how does this work? And there you go. The design doc for AWS Kinesis is right there. And it's like huge and scary, but it's all in front of you. And if you have the time, you can go and find the code. I was reading the code for S3 the other day, which was like nuts. It's all there. So you can go and just like read things up and like figure out how things work if you have the time and you're so motivated. So that's kind of like the general landscape of like what information looks like and just knowledge in general. And then from a team, on a team basis, it's really team dependent. Like you have some teams that are really, really great at sharing information with one another. They go out of their way to share. They set up like knowledge sharing sessions once every couple weeks where people present topics and they sign up for things, and people record the videos and put them on the internal YouTube thing, and it's a really, really good culture. And then I've seen other teams like don't do that as much, but anytime I've been in a situation where like teams don't do that, I try and encourage them to. So a lot of it is about like the team building trust with one another, the types of personalities that you have, whether or not they're introverts and extroverts, and like the combination of people that you get is really important. But yeah, most of the teams I've been on have been like really great. I'm kind of like a bubbly person too, and like pretty talkative, so I can draw things out pretty well. But usually it's up to the team in general. What pen do you use, or is it an iPad and pencil? That's a good question. I just bought this tablet. I used to use like a crappy one. Here it is. Oh, the cord is going to block me. This is a Wacom Intuos, and I love this tablet. I used to have a really bad one. The way it feels when you write is fantastic. It's wireless too, if you have Bluetooth on your computer. And it's got good battery life. Highly suggested, Wacom Intuos. And the program that I use to draw, this is a new program that I just, it's free. It's open source. It's called Arnote. Works on Mac, works on Windows. It looks great. The algorithm that they use for the drawing and the smoothing is like really, really good. And it feels fantastic on this tablet. So check that out. Want to make Fargate work with Docker image, but the CMD is changed every time. How can I do it? Do I need to create a new task revision every time? I'm not sure. That's like a very specific question. I'd have to look into that. I can't give you an answer off the cuff. But yeah, I'm going to call it here. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate you signing on and asking questions and staying engaged. If you missed part of this, you can watch the upload for the live stream that should be on in shortly after I stop here. But again, good evening, good night, good day, whatever time it is for you. I'm going to have a lot more AWS videos, reInvent videos coming out. So if you're into the news and you want to stay in touch with what's happening in that world, it's just ring the bell thing on my channel. I'll be publishing a lot in the next couple days. But yeah, again, thanks so much. I'll see you next time. Take care.